The garage door slammed shut so hard it rattled the shelves. Amara Okafor pressed her back against the cold concrete wall, her fingers instinctively sliding to her stomach, shielding the slight curve she had been hiding for weeks beneath oversized sweaters. The temperature outside had already dropped below freezing. In here, it was barely warmer. A single overhead bulb swayed in the draft, throwing pale yellow light across oil-stained floors and forgotten storage boxes. She didn't cry, not yet. She just pressed her palm flat against her belly and whispered the only words that mattered right now. "My bobbies, just hold on for me." The sound of heels clicking away on the other side of the door faded into silence. Madam Park was done with her for the evening, and somehow that silence felt more dangerous than anything she had said. If you love powerful stories about strength, betrayal, and justice, stay right here, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Welcome to the Velvet Empire family. This story is for you. It had started, like so many quiet disasters do, with a smile. Amara had walked into the Park estate 11 months ago as Daniel Park's wife, nervous but hopeful, carrying a single suitcase and a heart full of genuine love for the man who had chosen her. She was not wealthy. She had grown up in a 3-bedroom apartment with her mother and 2 brothers, put herself through university on scholarship, and built a career in medical research through sheer discipline. She was not what Madam Park had imagined for her son. And Madam Park never once pretended otherwise. The first week, the housekeeper's duties were quietly reassigned to Amara. Not officially, not directly. Just gradually, the way a tide comes in, a comment here, a disapproving glance there, until Amara found herself sweeping marble floors at 7 in the morning while the family sat for breakfast without saving her a plate. Mrs. Lin, the elderly housemaid who had worked in the Park household for over 2 decades, was the only one who slipped a warm bowl of rice porridge onto the kitchen counter and pretended not to notice when Amara ate it standing by the sink. Madam Park's cruelty was elegant. That was the most exhausting part of it. She never shouted. She never used crude words. She simply made Amara feel invisible in her own home, made her feel like a stain on the Park family legacy that hadn't been properly cleaned yet. "You do understand," Madam Park said one afternoon, her voice smooth as polished stone, "that Daniel married beneath himself. I tolerate your presence because he asked me to. Don't confuse tolerance for acceptance." Amara set down the vase she had been dusting and said nothing, because what was there to say to a woman like that? She discovered the pregnancy 8 weeks in, alone in the guest bathroom, hands trembling, staring at 2 faint pink lines like they were a message written in a language she wasn't sure she was allowed to read yet. Joy came first, real, flooding, overwhelming joy. Then fear arrived right behind it, cold and practical. If Madam Park knew she was pregnant, she would find a way to use it. Amara had seen enough in 11 months to know that the woman was not above cruelty disguised as concern. She would control the pregnancy, control the birth, control the narrative. The Bobbies would belong to the Park legacy before they were even born, and Amara would be further erased. So she said nothing. She ate smaller meals and wore looser clothing and calculated every movement she made around the house. She told no one. Except Mrs. Lin seemed to know anyway. The old woman said nothing, but she started bringing Amara extra food in the evenings, left folded blankets by her bedroom door on cold nights, and once pressed a bottle of prenatal vitamins into her hand without a word and walked away before Amara could react. She was not completely alone, but she was close enough to it. Daniel called every 3 or 4 days from whatever city he was rebuilding a company in. Singapore, Toronto, Dubai. His voice was warm when they spoke, but he asked surface questions and accepted surface answers because he trusted that she was fine. He trusted his mother's household. He trusted that the distance was manageable because he had always operated at a distance and things had always been manageable. He had no idea. The night Madam Park locked her out, it started with dinner. Sophia Kang had arrived that afternoon, unannounced, which was a lie, because Amara could see from the way the household staff had prepared the guest rooms that the visit had been planned for days. Sophia was the daughter of one of Daniel's most powerful business partners, and she was exactly the kind of woman Madame Park wanted standing in this house. She was polished, wealthy, fluent in 4 languages, and she looked at Amara the way someone looks at furniture they are already planning to replace. Dinner was formal. Candles, the good china, a meal Amara had not been asked to help prepare because Madame Park wanted everything perfect. Amara sat at the far end of the table, mostly ignored, watching Sophia lean toward the empty chair at the head, where Daniel should have been sitting, and say things to Madame Park that made the older woman laugh in a way Amara had never once heard before. After dinner, Madame Park asked Amara to clear the table. Not Mrs. Lin, not the kitchen staff, Amara. She did it without a word. She stacked the plates and carried them to the kitchen and told herself this was temporary. This would not last forever. Daniel would come home, and things would shift, and one day this house would feel like it belonged to her too. She was in the kitchen, washing the last of the crystal glasses, when she heard Madame Park's voice from the hallway. "I want her out of the main house tonight. Put her in the garage." A pause, Mrs. Lin's voice low and uncertain. "Madam, the temperature." "Did I ask for a weather report?" Another pause, silence. Then footsteps. Amara set the glass down carefully and gripped the edge of the sink. Her heartbeat was very slow and very loud in her own ears. Mrs. Lin appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face said everything her mouth couldn't. She pressed a folded blanket into Amara's arms, and her hands held on for just a second longer than necessary. Her eyes were wet. Amara nodded once. She understood. She walked to the garage herself. She didn't wait to be escorted. She didn't give Madame Park the satisfaction of watching her be removed. She walked through the side corridor, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped into the dark. The cold was immediate and total. The blanket helped, but not enough. She found a folded tarp in the corner and layered it beneath her, sat against the far wall where it was slightly less drafty, and pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders. She kept one hand on her stomach the entire time. 3 hours she sat like that, maybe 4. Time moved strangely in the dark and the cold. At some point she started talking to them. To the twins she hadn't named yet, hadn't announced yet, hadn't even fully allowed herself to celebrate yet. "I know this isn't what I promised you," she whispered. "I know this is not a good night, but I need you to stay. I need you to hold on because things are going to change. I promise you things are going to change." She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she believed it with everything she had left. She pressed her forehead to her knees and tried to generate warmth through sheer will. That was how the night passed. And somewhere in the main house, behind walls of marble and heated floors and crystal chandeliers, Sophia Kang slept in the guest suite that had once been prepared for Amara, and Madame Park sat in her reading chair and felt nothing. Daniel Park's flight landed 14 hours early. The Singapore acquisition had closed faster than expected, a clean deal, no complications, which almost never happened, and when his assistant offered to book him an overnight hotel before the morning flight home, he had said no. He wanted to go home. He didn't examine why the urgency felt stronger than usual. He didn't question the tightening in his chest that had been building for days like something was trying to get his attention. He took the private jet. He arrived at the estate at just past 3 in the morning. The house was still and dark. He let himself in through the main entrance and walked quietly through the foyer, loosening his tie, moving toward the kitchen for water before heading upstairs. The house smelled like whatever expensive dinner had been served earlier. He noticed the formal settings hadn't been fully cleared from the dining sideboard. Sophia Kang's coat was draped over the guest hallway chair. He stopped walking. Something was wrong. He couldn't name it yet. It was a frequency, a wrongness in the air of his own home, and a man who had spent 2 decades navigating hostile boardrooms had learned to trust that particular instinct with his life. He walked through the main hall. He checked the bedroom, empty, the bed untouched on Amara's side. He stood in the center of the room for a long moment. Then he heard it. The faintest sound, so quiet it was almost nothing. A voice, low and rhythmic, coming from beyond the far corridor. It took him several seconds to place the direction. The garage. He moved quickly now through the corridor, past the utility room, his hand finding the garage door handle in the dark. He pushed it open. The cold hit him first. Then the light from the corridor spilled in and he saw her. Amara, on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, her back against the wall, her face pale, her lips slightly parted, one hand resting flat against her stomach. She wasn't moving. Amara. His voice came out wrong, too sharp, too broken for a man who never let his voice break. She didn't respond. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, dropped to his knees beside her, pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse, faint but there. He pulled the blanket back and saw how she was dressed, how entirely insufficient it was for a night like this, and something in him went very, very still. Amara, he touched her face, cold, far too cold. Amara, open your eyes. Her lashes fluttered. Daniel, her voice was barely there. Then she sagged into him, and he caught her, and he was already reaching for his phone with one hand while holding her with the other. His jaw locked, his hands steady in the way they only got when he was operating in pure crisis mode, and had decided that nothing else in the world existed right now except fixing this. Ambulance now, Park Estate. He gave the address. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He held her against his chest on the garage floor until the sirens came. The hospital corridor was white and airless and smelled of antiseptic. Daniel stood outside the emergency bay doors with his hands in his pockets and his face absolutely unreadable. His assistant hovered at a discreet distance. No one spoke to him. No one dared. 40 minutes passed. The doors opened. A doctor in blue scrubs approached him, clipboard in hand, the particular careful expression of someone who had been rehearsing what they were about to say. "Mr. Park, your wife is stable." Daniel nodded once. The doctor paused. "There is something else you should know." Another pause, longer than necessary, the kind of pause that changes everything that comes after it. "Your wife is pregnant." Daniel did not move. The stress and cold exposure caused a mild complication, but we have stabilized both her and, the doctor glanced down at the clipboard, then back up. "Mr. Park, she is carrying twins." The corridor went completely silent. Not because anyone stopped talking, but because something in the air pressure changed, the way it does in the moment before a storm, when the atmosphere holds its breath. Daniel's expression did not crack. His face stayed exactly as it was, but his hands, deep in his pockets, curled slowly into fists and did not unclench. "Twins," he said. The word was flat and quiet and contained approximately 1,000 things that none of them would ever fully understand. "Yes, sir. Both appear healthy given the circumstances. Your wife is resting now. She will need monitoring for the next 48 hours, but we expect a full." "Thank you," he cut the doctor off quietly, not rudely, just with absolute finality. "I'll need a few minutes." The doctor nodded and retreated. Daniel stood alone in the corridor for exactly 3 minutes. No one approached him. His assistant, who had worked with him for 7 years and could read a room like a second language, simply stayed back and waited. Then Daniel took his phone from his pocket and made a single call. "I need full security footage from the estate. Last 72 hours, everything." He listened for a moment. "Yes, tonight." He hung up. He walked toward his wife's room. He opened the door quietly and stood in the doorway looking at her, pale against the white pillow, one hand still resting over her stomach even in sleep. a habit so automatic it had become part of her breathing. He had looked at this woman 1,000 times. He had never seen her before. Not really. Before we continue, if you are still here with this story, watching every moment unfold, then you are already part of the Velvet Empire family. This community was built for people who understand that real stories, real struggles, and real justice matter. And before we go any further, this is a moment for us to pause together. To every person watching this right now, may good health and physical strength be restored to your body if you have been carrying illness quietly. May sudden tragedy be turned away from your door. May your home know peace, real peace, not just the absence of noise, but the presence of genuine comfort and stability. To your children and grandchildren, may they be protected from harm, favored in every room they walk into, and guided into futures that exceed everything you have dreamed for them. May your finances hold steady even in uncertain seasons, and may provision come from directions you did not expect. May wisdom find you in the difficult decisions, the ones you lie awake making at night, and may clarity replace confusion. To those of you carrying silent pain, old wounds, burdens no one around you fully sees, may you experience healing in those places, deep, quiet, lasting healing. And may you live long with dignity and joy in all the years that are still ahead of you. If that blessing reached you today, drop an amen in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't yet. It is the one thing that keeps these stories coming. You are not just a viewer, you are family. Now, back to Daniel Park, because the man had just pulled up the security footage, and what he was about to see was going to change everything. The footage was clean, high resolution, time-stamped. Daniel sat in a private hospital room with a laptop on the side table and watched, frame by frame, the last 72 hours of his home. His face did not change. He watched his mother throw a plate of food into the trash while Amara stood 2 feet away. He watched his mother instruct the household staff to give Amara the heaviest cleaning tasks. He watched Sophia Kang arrive and be greeted warmly, with a kiss on each cheek, while Amara stood in the hallway unacknowledged. And then he watched the garage. He watched Mrs. Lin hand Amara a blanket with shaking hands. He watched Amara walk to the garage herself, upright, quiet, dignified, and disappear through that door. He watched the timestamp climb through the night. 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The garage door never opened again from the inside. When he had seen everything he needed to see, he closed the laptop. He sat very still. Then he made 4 phone calls, each one short, each one precise. When he was done, he set the phone face down on the table, stood up, and walked to Amara's room. She was awake now, sitting up slightly, looking at the window, her hands folded over the small curve of her stomach that was no longer hidden by anything. She heard him come in and turned to look at him. There was no performance in her face. No explanation, no apology, no attempt to manage his reaction. Just her eyes, steady and exhausted and holding something she had been carrying alone for far too long. He pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down. "How long?" he said. 11 weeks, she said. "How long has she been doing this to you?" Amara looked at him for a long moment, since the first week. He nodded slowly, like someone receiving confirmation of something they already suspected, and hating themselves for having taken this long to ask. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was a genuine question, not an accusation. She heard the difference. "Because you trusted her," she said simply, "and I didn't want to be the reason you had to choose." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that needed to be rearranged between them. "I'm going to need you to trust me now," he said quietly. "What happens next, I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." She held his gaze, then she nodded. What neither of them said aloud. There were things Daniel had discovered in the security footage beyond the cruelty. Things in the margins. A conversation captured by a hallway camera between Madam Park and Sophia Kang, clipped, carefully worded, just barely caught. a reference to a legal filing, a reference to a timeline, a reference to something called the Kang Alliance. Daniel had been in business long enough to recognize a coordinated attack, and this one had been moving while he wasn't looking. His lawyer called at 6 in the morning. Daniel listened without interrupting for 3 minutes. Then he said, "How solid is the trust clause?" His lawyer had been working with the Park Family Trust for 15 years. When he answered, his voice was unusually careful. "Ironclad, Daniel. Your grandfather was very specific. Any direct family member who takes deliberate action to harm the mother of the family heir is automatically disqualified from inheritance rights and board positions. There's no appeal mechanism written in. He wanted it permanent. So what my mother did last night locks her out entirely. Combined with the footage, there is no legal argument that survives review." A pause. "She didn't just cross a line, Daniel. She stepped off a cliff." Daniel thanked him and ended the call. He sat with that information for exactly the amount of time he needed to. Then he began preparing. The Park Foundation annual corporate gala was the event of the season, held in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, attended by CEOs, politicians, media executives, and investors from 4 continents. Madam Park had organized this year's event personally, and she had arranged it with a particular purpose in mind that only she and Sophia Kang fully understood. She stood at the top of the entrance stairs looking extraordinary in a black and gold gown, greeting guests with the ease of a woman who had spent her life in these rooms. Sophia stood beside her, radiant in ivory, and the way they stood together told a story that every person in that room was quietly reading. Daniel had not yet arrived. His absence was notable. His assistant had confirmed his attendance. The table arrangements had been adjusted to place Sophia at the head table, a detail that every senior board member noticed and filed away. At 8:30, the program began. Madam Park took the podium to a wave of polite applause. She spoke about the Park Foundation's legacy, about the future, about new partnerships and new blood. Her voice was confident and controlled. This was her stage. She had planned for this. "And it is my great honor tonight," she said, her smile reaching the full width of her face, "to introduce someone who represents the very future of the Park family legacy. A woman of exceptional character, exceptional vision, and exceptional heritage." The side doors opened. Daniel walked in. The room turned. He was in a black suit, unhurried, moving through the crowd with the specific kind of calm that only exists in people who have already decided how everything will end. 2 attorneys flanked him. His head of security followed 3 paces behind. Madam Park's voice faltered for the first time in her public life, just by a fraction, just enough for people close enough to notice. Daniel walked directly to the stage. He did not look at his mother as he passed her. He took the microphone from the podium stand with a single, easy motion. The room was completely silent. "Thank you for being here tonight," he said. His voice was level and clear. "There has been a change to this evening's program. I apologize for the adjustment. I want to take a moment to share something with everyone in this room, because I believe transparency is the foundation of everything this family stands for." He looked out at the assembled faces, hundreds of them all still. Behind him, a large screen descended from the ceiling. The lights dimmed slightly. The footage began to play. There was no sound at first, just images. Security footage of the Park estate, clean and time-stamped. The moments played out: Amara cleaning, Amara being handed the blanket, Amara walking through the corridor toward the garage, the door closing behind her. The timestamp running through the night, the temperature dropping. A murmur moved through the room like a current. Then Daniel spoke. "The woman you just watched being locked outside in freezing temperatures in a garage in the middle of the night is my wife." His voice did not waver. "She is 26 years old. She is one of the most intelligent and compassionate people I have ever known. She once saved my life, though that is a story for another time." He paused. "She was also, that night, 11 weeks pregnant with my children." The murmur became something closer to a gasp. "She was carrying my twins." Madam Park stood at the side of the stage and did not move. Her face had become something unrecognizable, not quite composed, not quite broken, something in between, something carved and hollow. Sophia Kang had already taken 3 steps toward the exit. "I want to be very clear about something," Daniel continued. "This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a miscommunication. This was a deliberate choice, made with full knowledge of my wife's presence in that household, and I have the documentation to prove it." He nodded toward his attorney. The attorney stepped forward with a folder. The room watched. "There is a clause in the Park Family Trust," Daniel said, "written by my grandfather, who believed above all things in the protection of family. The clause states clearly that any direct family member who takes deliberate action to harm the mother of the Park heir is immediately and permanently removed from all inheritance rights and all positions on the Park Company board." He let that settle for exactly 3 seconds. That clause has just been triggered. The silence in that ballroom was total. Madam Park's hand reached out and found the podium edge. She gripped it. The knuckles went white. "Furthermore," Daniel continued, "I have uncovered a coordinated effort between parties in this room to destabilize my marriage, force a fraudulent divorce, and execute a hostile takeover of Park Industries using manufactured legal pressure from the Kang family." His eyes moved briefly, precisely, to where Sophia had been standing. "The relevant contracts and communications have already been forwarded to our legal team and to 3 separate regulatory bodies. The Kang family's primary partnership contract with Park Industries will be terminated effective midnight tonight." Sophia stopped moving toward the exit. She stood very still. "I want to close by saying this," Daniel said. "My wife did not ask me for revenge. She asked me for nothing except trust. What I am doing tonight, I am doing because some things cannot be allowed to exist in silence. Cruelty does not disappear when you look away from it. It only grows." He paused. "My children will be born into a family that knows what they are made of. I want to make sure that family is worthy of them." He set the microphone back on the stand. He walked off the stage. The room erupted. Madam Park did not collapse dramatically. She was too disciplined for that. She stood at the side of the stage for a long time while cameras flashed and voices rose and her world rearranged itself into something she did not recognize. Then she walked quietly through the side corridor and into a private anteroom and sat down in a chair and did not speak to anyone for a very long time. She had built 40 years of social armor. In 11 minutes, her own son had taken it apart in public methodically, with the precision he had learned from her. She would spend a long time thinking about that. Sophia Kang left the building with her security team and issued no statement that evening. Her father's call to Daniel went unanswered. The contract termination letter arrived before sunrise. And in a private hospital room across the city, Amara Okafor watched the news on a small television mounted to the wall, one hand resting on her stomach. Listening to the anchor read the words that were spreading across every major outlet. "Billionaire disowns mother after cruelty to pregnant wife." She turned the television off. She looked out the window at the city lights and breathed slowly and let the silence sit around her like something earned. Mrs. Lin arrived the next morning with homemade soup in a thermal container and red eyes from crying. She sat beside Amara's bed and held her hand without saying anything for a long time. "You knew," Amara said quietly. "I suspected," Mrs. Lin said, "but you are much stronger than I was afraid you were." Amara smiled, the first real smile in a long time. 3 months later, in the same hospital where everything had almost ended, everything began again. Amara lay in a room full of soft light, holding 2 small, perfect, impossibly real human beings. One in each arm, their faces scrunched and rosy, their tiny fists curled like they were already preparing for something. She looked at them the way you look at proof that you survived something that could have destroyed you, with disbelief, with gratitude, with a love so large it had no edges she could find. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed beside her. He was not the version of himself that stood at podiums and dismantled conspiracies. He was something quieter, something he didn't often let anyone see. He leaned forward until his forehead almost touched hers, and he said, in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "No one will ever hurt you again." She looked at him, or them. Or them, he agreed, ever. Outside that room, the headlines were still running. Reporters were still chasing statements. The board was still reorganizing. The trust clause was still being processed through the legal system that would permanently document what had been done and what it had cost. But inside that room, none of it touched them. There were two small people in the world who had held on through a cold garage floor and a night that should have broken everything, and they were here, and they were breathing, and they were perfect. And that was enough. That was everything. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of what Amara carried, and the weight of what justice finally looks like when it arrives, then you are exactly who the Velvet Empire was built for. Drop your thoughts on Amara and Daniel in the comments. Tell us who you were rooting for. Tell us the moment you knew things were about to change. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave it a like. It takes 1 second and it means everything to us. Share it with someone who needs to hear a story about surviving. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because we have more stories like this waiting for you. Stories about strength, about betrayal, about the moment someone finally gets exactly what they deserve. You are part of the Velvet Empire family, and we are just getting started. Some people are left in the cold because others believe they have no power. But what those people never account for, what Madam Park never accounted for, is that endurance is its own kind of power. Quiet, patient, and when it finally moves, absolutely unstoppable. Amara knew that from the first night. She just needed the world to catch up.